Welcome to FUNC YOU UP, the podcast that gives you the best of functional medicine, nutrition, and wellness in 8 minutes or less.
Welcome back to FUNC YOU UP. This is Michelle Miller, clinical nutritionist.
And this is Diana Orchant, functional medicine RD-to-B.
Today we're going to talk about cortisol, that scary stress hormone. So it's funny, I remember back, I don't know, this has got to be maybe 10 years ago, there was a pretty popular advertisement on TV talking about cortisol and how it was the stress hormone and how terrible it was and how it would store and kind of be responsible for all this fat stored around the abdominal area.
It does really get demonized, doesn't it?
Yeah. And the truth is, I mean, we rely on cortisol to wake us up in the morning, to get our brain working pretty quickly. And I think it's gotten a bad reputation through the years. So let's just first break down what is cortisol.
Cortisol is the stress hormone that is released from the adrenal glands, which are two little walnut-sized glands that sit on top of the kidneys.
And so when the adrenal glands are working properly, they're going to be producing this cortisol level based on our needs at the time. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a moment on what the appropriate amounts are and when. But when our stress response is happening, for instance, if the fire alarm goes off right now, our adrenal glands are going to signal the release of this cortisol hormone. And that's what's going to allow us to quickly move and get out of the building. You know, you think about like a tiger chasing somebody in like primal times of, you know, how the cortisol is going to help them see very quickly and, you know, make quick decisions and allow the muscles to respond faster so that they can get away from that tiger, basically.
Right. And while we may all not be being chased by a tiger every day, we do have a lot of things in our lives that can cause that quick cortisol spike that gets us pretty stressed out. So, for example, it could be that simple email from your boss. It could be a little argument with your significant other, or have you ever been to the grocery store on a Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, it's like every man for themselves. So the idea here is that in our primal era, when we were being chased by a tiger, we usually would take time to rest and restore and recover from that cortisol spike. We're not doing that day to day right now. And I think that's often where this term adrenal fatigue comes in. But before we get there, let's talk about the proper response that cortisol is supposed to be providing every day. And that's really dependent on this thing called the circadian rhythm.
Yeah. So essentially, our cortisol levels are supposed to be pretty high in the morning. And they spike just a little bit more in the morning, and then it comes down like a nice slide throughout the day so that by the time it's 9 or 10 o'clock p.m., your cortisol should be nice and low so you're ready to go to bed.
And it's really supposed to be this nice balanced, like Diana is explaining, this nice balanced slide throughout the day where you shouldn't really feel the drop at any point of the day. But in the morning, your feet hit the floor. Within 15 minutes, your brain is on, you're thinking, and at the end of the day, you're tired and you're ready to shut down. That's kind of a good sign that the circadian rhythm is working well. How do we know when cortisol is off?
So a lot of people actually experience this when cortisol is off, but they don't even know it's their cortisol. So for example, when you wake up in the morning, some people have a really, really hard time getting out of bed. I mean, I've definitely been there. We've all been there.
Even with a good night's sleep.
Exactly. So it can be first thing in the morning, you have a tough time getting out of bed, or maybe around 11 o'clock a.m., you're sitting at your desk and you just can't stay awake, or that same afternoon dip at 4 p.m. Well, it could also be a lot of different things like blood sugar. Mm-hmm. A lot of times cortisol is one of the things to blame.
And so then sometimes people will come into our office looking for testing for this because maybe they've been Googling and like reading up on adrenal fatigue, and they say like, I'm pretty sure I have adrenal fatigue. Like, what can we do for this? So I do want to explain what adrenal fatigue is and what it isn't, because I think it's a little bit misused. This idea of adrenal fatigue, you think about these little adrenal glands, these cute little walnut-sized glands, and think of adrenal fatigue as a case where you're kind of like pumping the gas on those. You're just constantly firing more and more cortisol out of those glands. And after a while, when they don't have time to recover, they're not getting the proper nutrition, the proper rest, they're going to bottom out, basically. And so adrenal fatigue is more so when the adrenal gland just doesn't have the stamina to produce. But what we see more commonly is just dysregulation and this cortisol slide throughout the day, that maybe your levels are spiking at an inappropriate time or dropping too fast at an inappropriate time.
Exactly. So how would you go about testing this, though?
I will often start out, we do a fasting cortisol level in our blood work panel, and that gives me kind of a snapshot at what their level was in that moment via the levels in the blood. But we've really found the best way to test is through saliva. And what we do is we send our clients home with a test kit that has 4 different vials, and then we'll instruct them to collect their saliva into these vials at 4 different points of the day, usually first thing in the morning upon waking, sometime middle of the day, late afternoon, and then right before bed. But for instance, like you were saying, if somebody is having a significant drop around 11 a.m. or around 4 p.m., we might instruct them to collect around those times so we can kind of capture what is their cortisol level at that point in time. And then we get this beautiful report back from the lab that gives us a sense of what does their slide look like? What does their cortisol curve? And is this matching what a healthy circadian rhythm should look like?
Exactly. And we often see that slide's not so perfect. So that's where we come in with all different types of herbs or even lifestyle changes. For example, a lot of people will go to like a crazy spin class every morning, and there's a stretch after that class for a reason, just to like calm down after being revved up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things that you can do.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that will suppress cortisol. There are a lot of things that will encourage the release and more of a spike of the cortisol. Exactly what Diana's saying, both lifestyle and dietary and herbal support that we can look into. But really the most important thing first is to figure out, is this actually the issue? We'll have plenty of clients that come in and complain of fatigue, but it really might not be an adrenal or cortisol problem. We find that doing this cortisol saliva test, comparing it to the blood work, is one of the best ways to like first capture that and figure out, do we dive into this area first? Or is it something else completely? Is it blood sugar levels, like you mentioned? Is it iron, B vitamins, just not a proper diet in general?
Exactly. Just not eating well to support yourself throughout the day. And we're nutritionists, so that's what we always look at first.
Exactly. Food is the foundation. But I can tell you, I can speak from experience. There's been so many clients that have had different adrenal issues induced by, even cases of our autoimmune clients when they've had to be on prednisone. That can really throw off their circadian rhythm with their cortisol slide. Also, we see in our clinic a lot of patients who are rehabbing, and if they have been in pain for a long time, man, that really just drains your cortisol. And that's more of the case where we'll see kind of the adrenal glands have just been hit and hit and hit after time, kind of like pumping the gas nonstop. And finally, they just kind of give. And again, that's a different type of support that would need to happen at that point.
Right. That's where your curve's just going to not really be a slide at all. It's going to be pretty flat throughout the day.
Yeah. And then lastly, I think what's really interesting is we'll also take a look at this. If somebody's energy during the day seems okay, but they have insomnia or sleeping issues.
Right. That can just be a cortisol spike. Some people come in and they're like, I wake up every single day at 3 a.m. and I stare at the clock. And while that could be plenty of issues, cortisol certainly is one of them.
You got it. Especially if you're kind of having active racing thoughts and it's not based on a recent trigger of stress. It's kind of like life is fine, but you'll wake up and all of a sudden you're just having these active thoughts. You need cortisol for those type of active mental processing. So that's definitely a cue to us, a little bit of a hint to look at that cortisol at that point too. And sometimes we'll even send people home with 5 or 6 samples so that we can capture those times of where their cortisol is in the middle of the night if they're waking up like that.
Right. Sometimes you can feel it with the fast heartbeat, racing thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great examples. Well, thank you for joining us today on FUNC You Up. If you want to hear more about cortisol and some of our approaches to addressing an irregular circadian cycle of the cortisol, please check out our Instagram, Physio Logic NYC. And you'll also be able to catch some bonus material this week when the podcast goes live on my Instagram, Michelle_Miller_MSACN.
Great. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via our Instagram or email us at funkyouup@physiologicnyc.com. See you next time.
You've been listening to FUNC You Up. Be sure to like, review, and subscribe for more daily tips on living well.